Mr. Banerjee, thank you very much for joining in and speaking with us. First question to you. What's happening in terms of package part 2? What does the industry hear in terms of how and when the government intends to act?
So first of all, one would like to say that it was very important that we had this lockdown. And I think that really put us ahead of the curve, so to say, in other countries which have been combating this deadly war. But having said that, of course, I think appreciate Prime Minister's point, which has got widely reported in the media, that is saying that both lives and livelihoods becoming important. And I think there is a huge challenge really coming from the livelihood side. And over a period of time, what we would really like to see, and sooner than later, is where we could really define the green and the red and the amber zone, so to say. And if we are able to look at some of these green zone activities to start off, and the second phase, which we start into a next phase of the lockdown or a semi-lockdown or a gradual opening up from the 15th, one would really like to see a lot of those activities coming into the fold, which can be opened up safely, and especially industries. And along with industries today, as you know very well, the challenge is the harvest, challenge is the agriculture sector. That linkage is extremely important, and I think that's where we need to see that gradual sort of a step down of the lockdown. And very importantly, the logistics part of it. When we start production, we need the goods to move. So that itself will also be a very important thing. As we go ahead from the 15th, we would really look forward to that gradual opening up. With that caution, of course, there is this caution that one will have to always keep in mind. But I don't see any movement in the red zones, in the hot spots, so to say. But those industries, those clusters, which are based out of the green zones or the amber zones, with adequate precautions. And the industry will have a huge responsibility in the coming days in terms of seeing that a protocol is followed, a protocol which would be, maybe if there are 3 shifts today, we reduce it down to 2 shifts, the number of workers come down, the type of sanitation, the social distancing, and all of that with masks provided. I think with those protocols, it is extremely important because as we are seeing, if you see the situation of the migrant labor, so to say, at this point in time, while a lot have gone back home, there are a lot who are still in the cities who have not been able to go back home or who have not gone to go back home. We need to see that there is some amount of opportunities given to them. So I think that's going to be very, very critical. And along with that, of course, is this entire discussion that we have kept with the government as well as with the industry on the package.
You raised many excellent points, Mr. Banerjee, but the concern is whether there is or not economic cohesion within states in terms of how this should be approached from an economic point of view. Because as we speak, there are several states across the country that have already extended their lockdown. As you alluded to, one of the biggest problems right now is the supply side choke up that's happening. Now, parts have to move from one state to another. So is there clarity, sir, on how exactly this is going to be, worked out between states as well?
So one of the things that we have been suggesting, and one of the things I think that the only way that you have is to define certain routes where we can see the movement of goods taking place, the routes which would lead up to our ports, so that exports are not blocked. You see, what's happening is, one question, which is a fair question, would be, if you start production, whether there would be demand enough. If you are producing those cars, would people buy it? But then there is a huge amount of export orders which one is sitting on. So that itself can be started off, and that could be an important economic activity, which will also have a huge positive repercussion on livelihood. Having said that, therefore, what is required is the connect. So if we are able to define, say, for instance, the golden quadrilateral, so to say, in terms of free movement, and here when the central government would be saying or would be notifying the movement of logistics, the movement of traffic, movement of truckers, I think there needs to be a template which should, and your point is an extremely important point, there has to be a template which is going down from the center to the state, so that this time, when we are seeing that gradual opening up, we see a coordination between the center and the state in terms of a much smoother sort of lift up of the lockdown to say that these truckers are able to fly, these goods are able to move. I think that's going to be important. So definition and defining these routes, these quadrilateral plus other highways, the national highways where goods are moving. I think that's going to be very, very critical and important, and that needs to be uniformly practiced and followed across the states for this to be meaningful.
One understands the need for measured decisions, Mr. Banerjee, but there is a sense of frustration that we haven't heard enough from the government. I mean, at this point, some estimates point to 100 to 120 billion dollars in terms of losses. I'm going to address the jobs issue, of course, separately. But if you go by some of the global examples, action has been preemptive rather than reactive. CII's own package recommendations are far higher than what we've heard in part one from the finance ministry. Why the delay, and how soon do you expect to hear something on part two of financial relief?
So, there, of course, this frustration builds up. But, I would imagine that the package coming out when when industry is going back to work, when we are going back, is going to be important. So, I would think that while one feels that there is a phenomenal delay in announcing, I think there are two things that we should do. We should be very the information system, the announcement system should be very clear that before the lockdown, before there is gradual stepping down of the lockdown, that this is the way it should be done, so that there is understanding and there is no chaos by suddenly bringing in a whole lot of notifications as to what will be open and what will not be, so that there is confusion in minds of the people. So as you do that, I think coinciding with that should be the package which comes in, because whenever industry gets back to work is when the pain of needing that package comes back. And I think that's the time, and I think we should be prepared. And I would imagine there is a lot of preparation time which is going in, and rightly so. Even much before the lockdown came in and much before we were hit by COVID, there was this challenge on the economy. And therefore, this has to be a very, very measured sort of package that comes in, and as you and I would agree that this is not going to go away in the next 4 months. I mean, the economic situation as it is. So we need to be very careful how we fire our guns as far as the package is concerned. So I would imagine there is a lot of consideration going in, and it also depends on what will open up, what will not open up. So that's the way I would read it, and I would imagine that it would be coincidental, and one would see it in the next few days as and when one sees a gradual shift towards from the lockdown.
CII, of course, represents some of the marquee industries and names, Mr. Banerjee, but I think there are bigger concerns on what's happening with this entire small and medium enterprise ecosystem. First of all, what came in Relief Part 1 addressed organizations that had employees less than 100, which seemed like a very, very small fraction of the enterprises we're talking about. And secondly, this directive, if you may, of the fact that organizations must provide salaries to employees even while no revenue is being generated, is frankly raising a lot of concern about how these organizations will be even able to survive once they come out of this lockdown. What are CII's recommendations? I know you've made some points about working capital help, but what are your specific recommendations to the finance ministry on that?
So, our approach on the economic revival package is really, if one can say, broadly twofold. And a part through the fiscal expansion, which is directed towards the bottom of the pyramid, which is extremely important at this point in time. And also, I would think the second part of it is enhanced credit to the industry through the banks. Now, this is important, and while there are various estimates of what should be the package, which should come out from 10% of the GDP to 12% of the GDP to 15% of the GDP, we must also understand, as we discussed a little while back, that this is here to stay. So we should not fire everything at one go. We should be very careful, measured in the way we fire, because packages would be required again. In a few months' time, we will fall back to the government to ask for more. So having said that, I would think that one recommendation, very important, is to give an additional, say, 1.5% to the distressed, to the absolutely distressed section through a combination of DBT for BPL, which was being done, and also DBT for JAM, which will cover enterprise and self-employed, which is extremely important, and DBT for Manrega. which will also help increase productivity. So I think that's the way one can calibrate it. And I would imagine that if banks are coming along through which a lot of financing, so a lot of this package can come in, where we could see easy financing from the banks for a couple of years, so to say, on the salaries for the next 3 to 4 months of the small and the tiny sector. That itself would be a big boost. One thing which we should not miss at this point in time, one big boost itself could be the payments, which are huge amount of payments which have been stuck over the last many months by the government into the system, PSU, so to say. But if we can really make that going, that would itself ease the pressure of the government in terms of the package. So I think the clearance of the bills of the small and the medium scale enterprises, and if you pay the large will pay the small. So there is a chain there too. So I think that needs to be, and that does not require additional allocation of funds. So I think we need to act smartly as far as this entire package is concerned. And I think most of what we are saying should really go towards direct cash transfers for the needy sections of the society. And I completely agree with what was done earlier. So about 2 lakh crores, which was the package, in addition to the package which was announced earlier, which is so that's very important. And as I said, the banks extending funding to enterprises across the board would be of great value. So I'm not saying only small scale, I'm saying across the board. So which cause there is a chain. You have the small would be supported. If the small is healthy, the large will be healthy. If the large is healthy, the small will be healthy. So there is this symbiotic relationship which we must also sort of understand and work around it.
So it is, of course, but the feeling on the ground, of course, Mr. Banerjee, is that India has one of the most stringent lockdowns with the least economic stimulus. Now, aside from what's happening at the bottom of the pyramid, there are specific industries that have been hit much harder than the others, which have already made the call for, not just relief, but a bailout, whether it's aviation, the tourism industry and the hotel industry. Has CII made any specific recommendations for some of these verticals, which have been hit harder than?
Yeah, so when we are talking about a phased restart, if one can talk about it, what we have really mentioned is that with specific protocols for this, we need to restart. We need to put that restart button on sectors like the textiles and garments, chemicals, retail, food processing, agriculture. I mentioned to you agricultural mandis. This would be very important. And there are sectors which we have prioritized in terms of the green, red, and amber, as I said. But one thing, point one, if I would say, is that the sectors that are a part of the support of the essential goods and the services ecosystem, that should go on first in terms. And the second is those sectors which are a part of, which are the labor-intensive sectors. That's going to be very critical and important. Then comes also the third, the export-oriented units. And I said that this is a time when there is a lot of export orders sitting on us, and that would really help us manage our imports. But to your point on how different industries, the biggest hit, if I can see, is of course the small and the medium enterprises. The second part, which I would think that we need to really, if you look at sectors, the sectors work in a fashion. I mean, you did mention about the civil aviation sector, so to say, or also the sectors like tourism. These will take time to take off. This is not going to be. This cannot. Much that I think the banking route to financing them would be very critical, and I think that's what we would look at. But there are other sectors which will be in pain soon. I mean, when CII has told its members, large corporates, that we will follow a code of conduct, that the senior management should take the hit as far as remuneration is concerned. We will not retrench workers, and we will not retrench people from the bottom of the pyramid. But this you can say for a certain period of time. But beyond that certain period of time, this will weigh on every industry, medium or large or small. So what we are really trying to look at is the package, while be really oriented towards certain sectors, like I mentioned, textiles and garments and all those very strong labor-intensive sectors which are in pain. We must have the banking route to be fair across the board, to see a lot of capital is available for companies to push the restart button. and see how and then the entire chain flows. So there has to be, it could we should not be just looking at one particular sector and getting while one particular sector is in pain, we should focus on it. There is across the spectrum, there are people in pain.
I am going to come to the banks in a little bit, Mr. Banerjee, but I want to bring back to the point you made about, what I think will be the body blow impact of coming out of this pandemic, which is unemployment. CMI's March data stands at 23%, which by their own admission looks like a modest estimate. We have numbers from FIEO for the export-centric sectors that you alluded to, which points to 1.5 crore job losses. Pranab Sen puts it at 50 million people in 2 weeks. How bad, sir, candidly, do you expect the unemployment situation to get? Because it's going to hit us.
Yeah. So what would happen is I would imagine that there is if you really look at it in two ways. One way of looking at it is presently there is no production, there is nothing happening now, and there will be a impact on jobs. Obviously there is an impact on jobs, and you talked about the numbers, you talked about the CMI numbers, and so there is obviously this huge impact which is getting created. The second part is that people, as we go along, we are talking about working in shifts. We are working about an 8-hour shift to becoming 12-hour shift. We are talking about two shifts instead of 3 shifts. That itself will see a lot of pressure on jobs. So it's not just going away tomorrow when we sort of see a phased opening up. Then third, companies are going to come out of this challenge in the next few months' time. And if I speed forward to say about 5 months later or 6 months later or even 7 months later, companies would come out with strategies which will definitely be much smarter companies, smarter, quote unquote, smarter in the sense that I will require lesser number of people running my plant. And that type of planning, that type of scenario is building is already there on the drawing boards of all manufacturing plants and all manufacturing companies. So that itself will bring in a lot of pressure, pressure on jobs. So I would imagine that this entire pressure on unemployment, which is going to be coupled with when we are talking about so much of that's why I have always mentioned that we need to be very prudent in terms of the doleouts the fiscal that space that we see, because that would also lead to a lot of inflationary pressures. So all of that together, it's going to, there are huge challenges in front of the economy, and I would imagine that the jobs point that you brought up is definitely not understated. It's a big point which is looming large on and we need to work together to see how more economic activities can be permitted, can be done both in the short run and in the long run, as how we can create these champion sectors, so to say, like the textiles and others, which are job intensive sectors, which can be championed to see how they can help in the post-COVID scenario to help jobs get picked up. So clusters are going to be very important.
It's not a situation that we have only just walked into, though, Mr. Banerjee, and that's the problem. We've been working with 7 quarters of extremely poor growth. The World Bank now says that the green shoots of a rebound that we saw at the end of 2019 have been completely decimated with COVID, especially for the Asian region. Some point to between 1 to 3% growth, some point to negative growth for the full year. And it's a situation where industry has not been investing for many quarters now in terms of capacity, upgradation or expansion. How bad a hole do you think we've dug for ourselves in terms of growth, and how long do you think it's going to take to get back out of there?
So one of the biggest things that we have been, so there are 2 big positive factors which we have in front of us, which we must leverage to see how we can get out of this. Now obviously there is. As you rightly pointed out, there are excess capacities. We are even industry was running at sub 70 sort of % capacity utilization for them to start investing when this has hit us. But what we really need to do is to see how we are able to, one big point which I always keep talking about is we need to still become this country needs to become much further easier to do business in. And I think that's going to be very, very critical. And there is so much of scope. There is so much of scope for us to do that. And if we are able to really remove these bottlenecks, um, I would imagine that there is a huge internal demand in the country. Plus, also we have this. I still believe that there is huge competitive advantage that India has to look at the export market. And if we create export as one of the essential sort of the services that we have in the country, along with easing up of our business processes down the line into the districts, we should be able to come out of this over a period of time. But how fast we do it is the question. And I think that's where, again, I come back to a huge coordination between the center and the state, because here a lot of this also operates out of the state than the center. So I think I have hope in the future. I have strong hope in the future because Indian industry, see, one of the things that Indian industry is extremely competitive when it comes to bringing its goods up to the doorstep of its factory. So the competitive edge comes down when you from the doorstep of the factory you go to the port or to the customer. That's the area, that's the part that we need to improve. That's the efficiency which we need to work on today. And I think and it's something which is not rocket science for us to work on. It needs a lot of coordination, and I think that's something that we must focus on post COVID. And time for us to even prepare for it is now, because that will remove that pain. That will remove the pain that we are in today. It's got all magnified because of COVID. And if we are able to really become more efficient in that part, in that zone, we would definitely see demand picking up. We will see both domestic demand, and we will be catered to the international demand as companies and firms.
Mm. I appreciate your optimism, Mr. Banerjee, but I think a hefty dose of realism is also in order. Candidly, how many quarters of pain do you think we should brace ourselves for? And is next growth a likelihood in that scenario?
No, I don't think that we should see for the. You must also understand that we should see the last. The present few months, the last 1 month, the next couple of months to be sort of dead months completely. So one must appreciate that. So this year is gone. Obviously, this year is gone. I'm hopeful that we should. If what we said, what we discussed, and that optimism that you see in my words, I would see by the end of next year we should be able to. I don't see a problem when India still should not aspire for that 8%. We have all the features of getting back to an 8% growth in the next 3 years' time. Or the next 2.5 years time. I don't see a problem in India. I might sound to be completely too optimistic, but you have all the ingredients for it. It's just that we should not lose the match over and over again. So we need to win it. We need to win it by doing it. And as you very well know that while we talk about ourselves to have improved so much on the ease of doing business index, but when you look at contractual sanctity, we are still one of the poorest in the world. So there are so much of scope for improvement of these of some of these issues that's from where when I see this huge scope for improvement, that's from where my optimism comes in. And I would still think that the next 1 year would be a year of preparing, and come April next year, I would imagine that we should be set for a strong growth rate thereafter.
Mm-hmm. There is opinion, though, Mr. Banerjee, that is voiced both privately and sometimes publicly, that Indian industry did not speak truth to the powers at the time when it was important, when it was in order, in terms of the fact that the credit market was, completely log-jammed, that it was leaking like a sieve across parts, that industry was just not being able to move in terms of, revenue offtake because consumption was dropping off. Do you think this is the time for both parties, the industry and the government, to sort of sit down and be a lot more realistic and candid about the enormity of the situation?
See, one of the things that I would, I again believe in is there is a lot of learning. There's a two-way learning, and in the various government discussions, the consultations that one has been in, we've seen that there is always an open mind to take in a lot of issues or criticisms, etc. So it's not that probably it doesn't come up onto the media, and we have not spoken via media, so to say, but in our one-to-one discussions there has been severe criticisms of each other, criticism of the industry, and it's not that industry is always all right, and there have been various gaps which we have discussed within the industry, and this two-way discussions have been very strong. It is where we have failed is, and I'm really not concerned about whether the government is listening to us or not listening to us, because I do believe that there are several forums of us venting. There are several forums of us talking about this not happening. Our reports go. This all are there. That's very much there. The problem is implementation, and I think the understanding is solid. We all know what to do. We fail in that last mile of implementation. And if you see our last few years or whatever, last many years, India, we have got stuck many a times just because we have not been able to implement the policy announcements, etc., etc. Much of it has been quite good. But when it has come to implementation, the coordination, the understanding, the interpretation of the law across from the district right up to the center, I think it has been so varied, and that's the tightening that we need to do. I'm not so much concerned about the consultation or whether we have been able to tell the government or not. That has been done. That has been well done. And I think, as you rightly said, the answer would lie in a lot of coordinated approach, and more, I mean, if we see two-way traffic between more of industry wise people who have run corporates, who are really not working in the corporates, there are various leaders who, if they can contribute to government thinking in terms of government implementation. We have had several fantastic projects. The entire Jandhan, I mean, the leadership that we saw from someone moving on from the private sector into the government sector led to a phenomenal implementation. So I think if you see some of these type of two-way traffic moving on, I'm sure that we will be able to do it. I'm really not pessimistic about that. But yes, we need to get that to happen. How much we can get that to happen, I think we will have to depend on very strong conviction that we will see results only if we are able to coordinate well. I think that's where the trick lies, I would imagine.
Thank you very much for your time today, Mr. Banerjee. I know you're pushing a lot of pedals simultaneously. Thank you for coming and speaking with me. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Nice talking to you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, sir. All done. You're a free man. Shall I send you the link once it's up, or shall I send it to your executive assistant? What would you prefer?
No, you can send it to me. Please send it to me.
Great.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Bye.
Bye.